Lesley. I'm the Deputy General Secretary of the Writers Guild. Absolutely delighted to be with you here today. And in a moment, I will introduce you to the real deals, the people who are going to be doing some of the talking today. But just a couple of other small housekeeping points before we start. You can keep your camera on, that's great. Or you can turn your camera off if you don't want us to see who you are. Do please, we ask, be respectful though of other people's privacy, and don't take photographs of people and tweet them without their permission. Do please remember that anything you say, as mentioned, it's an open session, is in the public domain. And this is a completely open session, anyone was welcome. So we ask that you're respectful of other people's professional boundaries or lifestyle or anything else, and are mindful in what you put into the public domain. So if you have particular queries or issues to do with anything that you've experienced in your professional practice, maybe we can either you could refer to that in more general terms, and we can always follow up afterwards with that. So there's a few housekeeping. If you would like to use closed captions, they are available to you. You can switch at any point between speaker view and gallery view, but I will tell you in advance that we are going to be putting some slides up for you just to help see where things are. So so be aware that that's coming up. Okay, a few more people still coming in. I will now introduce you to my co-host for this afternoon's session. We've got Jen Toksvig. Unmute yourself, Jen, and say hello.
Hello. Lovely to see you all.
Marvellous. And we're also delighted to be joined by Kelly Wood from the MU. I don't know if you want to give us a wave, Kelly, and say hello.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, delighted to be here. It's really nice to be invited.
So we've devised some of the guidance that we've produced for writers with the MU. So Kelly's here and will be able to answer any specific questions relating to music that inevitably will come up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a bit of a journey, really, through the landscape and through the materials that we've got and that we've produced and that people will find useful. So I'm going to start us off by sharing the screen. Which will give us a bit of an introduction. Now, if you're not spending as much of your life on Zoom as I am, and you're wondering how you can see this screen when the little box of pictures is in, you can just move the pictures of us all around your screen just by clicking them if you need to. So, so you can do that. Can everybody see that? Yes, chat's already going. So what we're going to do is the Writers Guild, which hopefully many of you are members of, we have produced a whole range of documents, and in fact I would say it's a bewildering range of documents at times, and they all appear in different places on our website. So part of the purpose of this session is that we're going to show you where you find the right things for the right moments and give you a little bit of a guide. And there's two key sections of our website that you'll find these summarized here. We've got a resources section and we've got a rates and agreements section. And for different bits, you'll need to look at different sections of the website. And that's part of what we're hoping to help you with today. So we're going to step through some discussions and some questions and cover things that we know some people have submitted in advance. And then if you've got queries and questions along the way, then drop that in and we'll do our best to answer them. So our very first that's where you'll find those on the website. Our very first key piece of information is the musical theatre guide and kit, and I'm going to start off by saying to Jen, could you tell us a little bit about why we produced this? What was the background? Why does musical theatre need its own guidelines? How did that develop? Jen?
I love this publication because it's really straightforward and it has all the basic steps in it. But it came from, the Writers Guild has had musical theatre guidelines for a while, and the lovely David James, who is with us today, I think, created those in collaboration with our previous General Secretary, Bernie Corbett. And they're comprehensive guidelines that I then updated with Ellie Pears, our current General Secretary. And the guidelines are extensive and they are complex and they contain legal language that can be difficult to understand if you've not seen it before. So, and also we wanted the MU and the Guild wanted to work together to make sure that writing teams are being treated equally in the room, so that you're not sitting there wondering what your composer is making or what kind of agreement they've got. Everybody gets treated on the same terms. And in order to make all of that stuff clear and to signpost everybody to the different documentation that is useful, we made this collective publication called The Kit, which we launched a couple of years ago. And if you don't know anything about anything to do with how to go about writing a musical in terms of the process and in terms of the basic agreements, then this points you at all the basic information and all of the places you can find other support and details. So it's a wonderful thing. I love it.
and one of the things that I will just flag up that I think is really great about the guidelines and about the kit is that they really set out quite clearly the different categories and the different types of musicals, because what we're going to mainly talk about today is original musicals, where everything is original. It's being written from the ground up, but we're aware obviously there are other types of musicals, and we will come back and cover some of that in the questions towards the end. So that's the first point there.
And just to say that I've put links in the chat to our website and the resources page and the rates and agreements page. And as we go along, keep an eye on the chat because I'll pop some useful stuff in there, and also ask us questions as we go because I'm keeping an eye on the chat.
So Jen, I think you're going to give us a bit of a starter.
Well, I've got a question for you, Lesley.
Yes.
I want to write a musical with two very good friends of mine. And I need to know where to start.
So the first place to start is if you're going to be writing a musical with different people, especially if they're your friends, but not just if they're your friends, is you want to start with a collaboration agreement, which is a way to really bring some clarity to the relationship. So you're going to want to have a look on the website in the resources section of the website, and you'll see that what we have available is a model collaboration agreement for musical theatre. Now, and it looks like that then on the cover. You've got the red cover. You can adapt it. It's not entirely off the peg. But what it does is it really clearly specifies how the different roles are going to be split, what's happening about copyright, what's happening about the split of fees that are going to be from the work that you're going to do.
Lesley,
yeah.
Can I stop you just a second? Your audio is not very clear. Is there a way you can get closer to the microphone, maybe?
Let me see. How is it? I think it might be more to do with my internet than my mic. Is it okay? Has it gone very quiet?
It's just a little fuzzy. Keep going. If you can be a little closer to your microphone, that might help.
Okay, so the mic is.
It's always the way, isn't it? You test this stuff out beforehand, and then during the thing,
it goes a bit fuzzy. If it carries on, let me know and I'll switch months.
Okay.
Okay. So you've got your collaboration agreement. It's covering all of the different splits. What happens when the relationship ends? Who can do what with what? And that is really something that you need to be aware of.
Sorry, there's questions popping up and I'm just slightly distracted. Yes, so model collaboration agreement. So now I've made a lovely agreement with my friends where we've agreed for now, forever, how things are always going to work. Is that?
No,
okay.
No, you don't want to be doing that. You want to make sure that it's time limited. Right, so a fixed period of time, it will set it out. It might be up until one stage of development. It might be for one production, but collaboration agreements can change and develop as well. So you set something up, and the key thing here is if then, through the development process, things change, as they inevitably do, then it's fine to say, yeah, I'll do that. We could do that differently, but we need to amend our collaboration agreement. Or actually, in retrospect, we're not sure this is working anymore, and it's looking like that person isn't going to be playing a part in this anymore. So we might need to amend it and adapt it. So it's an adaptable agreement. And the key thing is, if you're a member of the Writers Guild, and you've come up with your collaboration agreement, the key part of your membership, of course, is that we will look at contracts and agreements for you.
So I'm having trouble hearing you now, and maybe we'll try is there another mic we can try? Sorry. But I know what you're going to say, and I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sharing while I just switch my mic out. Hold on 1 second.
Just to say, there are also closed captions if anybody would be helped by those.
How's that? Is that any better?
That sounds a little clearer now. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So you were saying that the process can change as you go along, and the people can change.
And the people can change, and you adapt the collaboration agreement accordingly.
Okay. And just to say that there is an aspect of this collaboration agreement process, collaborative creativity, that is also present in devised work. And there are conversations that can be helped by this model collaboration agreement if you're also making devised work. So those are conversations to have around collaboration as well. Okay, great. So we've signed our collaboration agreement, and we know that we're going to amend it if we discover down the road that what we thought we were going to do is not what we're doing. What next? We're going to write the musical, and we're going to send it to theatres, and they're going to put it on. Oh, okay.
No, please don't. Please don't do that. So one of the issues is that the development process, you will normally be contracted. If you've been commissioned to write some work, then you might get the commission before the work exists. So you would be being paid to write it. Rather than doing all of the writing in the first instance. At other times, however, you might have written it first. It might be a piece of work that you've previously written that you're then trying to get interest in. But we would really strongly recommend that you don't send whole scripts unsolicited to venues. If you're sending something as an unsolicited piece of work, we'd suggest it's better that you produce a pitch document. So you get a summary of what the work is, and that's what you send. But really be aware that lots of theatres, lots of companies, they simply don't have the resources all year round to read any work that is sent to them. So you might not get a response. It's also really important that you're monitoring what's happening to your work and where it's going and who is seeing it, so that you can follow it up. see if people have done that with a courtesy email. If people are looking for work to develop, companies, theatres, they may have a submission window. They will ask for specific things. It might just be a collection of scenes, it might be a few songs. You know, have a look, find out. But we would advise against simply sending a full script unsolicited out to various venues.
There's an additional sort of request for information coming in chat. How do we send our music and song samples to theatres? But theatres that accept new writing will or should have a page on their website where they're making the invitation with the details of what they want to receive. So always check with the company, and if there isn't anything evident on their website, then either they're not making the invitation, or you can email them and say, do you make invitations for new writing? And if you do, where can I find that information?
Exactly, and if you're doing really speculative work, you know, your work may have a home somewhere else. So you may have a website, you may have your own profile on various platforms, and you can direct people towards that. And if they're looking for work, they'll be willing to do that. If they're not looking to take on new work, then they're not just going to be bombarded with material that there's no way they can really respond.
There's a question from Andrea. As a writer totally new to theatre, does one pitch to theatres or producers or both? Some theatres are producing houses and you can pitch to them and they'll make invitations. Some independent producers will make invitations to receive new writing. Anyone who is a producer might be building based or not building based. And the simple answer is ask. If you want to make work in a certain building, ask them how that works, and they will either say we work with independent producers, or they'll say this is our process.
And again, of course, if you're a member of the Guild, our newsletter, we will regularly include opportunities and who is looking for new work and when windows are opening and so on, and you can get information there in the opportunities or competition section.
So I'm not just sending my work off, that's fine, I've got that, but it's just me and my friends, and actually we're just going to find a theatre and we're going to put it on because it's quite difficult to find a producer. So we're just going to go, we're going to hire a venue and we're just going to put the work on ourselves.
You're still going to want to have a lot of this nailed down. Really, you are still going to want to have your collaboration agreement, because one of the things that we find in the office dealing with inquiries is that the biggest disputes are when people have gone into projects as really good friends or partners, and then by the time they come out of it, they are none of those things anymore. And that's usually because they haven't had the kind of clarity around some of the working relationships that they should have done, or that other personal stuff has got in the way. So you're still going to want to have all of the paperwork really set out very clearly. If you're taking the step into putting things on yourself, you're kind of stepping into the role of a producer as well. So it's worth separating out responsibilities and making sure that you're really clear about who is doing what. But you will also want to have a look at our guidelines for theatre writers for profit share or expenses only productions. So you can still have a look at what would be a reasonable expectation if you're working on a show of that kind with your friends, and agree it up front. Because the other thing that happens is, of course, there's the dream scenario where there's the unexpected millions made from your little show that you've put together with your friends, but there's the sadly more common phenomena of the unexpected debt when it hasn't quite worked out, and you've ended up in a difficult financial situation. And if you've got all that covered and thought through at the start, then you're going to be in a much stronger position to resolve those issues without damaging your working or professional or personal relationships with others.
Also, it's often true that if there's a 3-person team and you agree you're going to self-produce, one person might have more of a propensity to do, or more availability to do that work, and it starts to feel unfair. Whereas if you've separated out the producing work, then you're counting producing hours and you're allocating funds and resources for that separately, and then it feels far more fair to the person who's doing that work and the people who are not doing that work. There's some questions in the chat. I'm sure this is in the kit, but are musical commissions fixed between writers, composers and lyricists? as it is for play script commissions under the Guild. Not sure I exactly understand.
I think we're going to come on and cover that in a moment.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that stuff in a minute. So if we don't answer that question specifically, come back to us. MU have their own rate card for performing. How should this work between writers and musicians? So the way that we currently work with the MU, and Kelly can jump in on this, I'm sure, is that our guidelines that we publish and the kit are the guidelines for composing for musical theatre. So that the MU also have rates for composition under different circumstances. We kind of work on our guidelines and our rates right now, but if the MU has a higher rate and you want to negotiate that for your team, great, negotiate the higher rate wherever you can, that as a general rule in life. So yeah, we wanted to make it so that teams weren't represented differently, so that 3 people writing the same show aren't getting completely different deals. But any good agent will negotiate the highest rate possible. So yes, always go for the best you can get.
Yeah, I think we'd agree with that. Our rates, our performance rates are they're very clear. A lot of them are promulgated, so they're not collective bargaining. They've not been agreed with other bodies, but they do absolutely serve as minimums, and they're really useful in things like funding applications because arts councils recognise them. It is very different for writing and composition work, and like you said, we do have different kind of commissioning fees, and we have examples and sort of research showing the kind of rates and fees. But it's such a wide field, we find that it is down to negotiation, and the guidelines help with that. But what we do is if people have been offered a fee or they're negotiating something, we do say, well, bring it to us and let's have a look at the whole deal, the whole package, and then we can see if that works in context, and if not, help people to negotiate something that's more appropriate for the usage.
And also the MU and the Guild are friends, and we talk to each other a lot. So when there's a team where hopefully everybody has a union, we will talk to each other and make sure that everybody feels like the fairest, best thing is happening. Is there a set contract for arrangers? Would it be okay to talk about that specific kind of thing at the end? Because it's a more particular thing, and we're just going to do the general stuff right now. So I found a venue, and we're putting the show on, and we've agreed who's going to do some of the producing work and all that stuff. And then from that, a production company gets interested in our show, and they want us to sign the rights over to them so that they can do things with the work, maybe develop it or produce it or both. So we're just going to give them the show.
No. Oh. Can you not? Yeah. So this is quite common, and it's also common that sometimes you will get someone who will offer to find you some money, and they'll say, I'm going to go away and talk to some money people, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it's really important, yet again, without wanting to sound like a scratch record, that you get that agreement pinned down. Okay, so it needs to be time limited. You need to be really clear. You're certainly not giving them the rights to your work for this. We have a document on the website. I'll just do a very quick share again to show you where you can find it. Again, it's in the resource section, but it's much further down the resource section under other guidelines and resources, and it's called the Right to Pitch Template Contract. Now, it's actually designed around TV, so it's not a complete read across. However, what it does is it really explicitly sets out what you are agreeing that someone can do. So it will give a fixed period of time and say, I agree for this company or this individual to talk about and present my work to other parties for a fixed period. And that if that hasn't happened, then we will then it will revert back at the end if you haven't managed to find anyone, and that's the end of the relationship and you're no longer involved. And you can extend it and you can work with it, but get that pinned down before you enter into any agreement.
Just to clarify this, there are producers who will agree to do development and promotional work, and there are development companies or organizations who might support writers and have a long ongoing relationship with a writer with a particular show, or just with the writer's work in general. And that's what we're talking about here. That it's never clearly defined really in the musical theatre industry conversations that happen amongst writers, but what it is giving somebody the right to pitch, and there are guidelines for that, and there are specific restrictions, and all of those things are there to protect the writers and their ability to benefit from their work. So the protections allow someone else to help and support the work and the writer to an extent, but not take advantage in an unreasonable way. So anything that's like a development company or a support company or a early producer, whatever they call themselves, what that is giving someone else the right to pitch your work, and it has specific restrictions around it, and also details around the provision of dramaturgy within that relationship is something that you should absolutely ask the union about, because there are specific guidelines around that. It's not just and you get free dramaturgy agreement. That's not an easy thing, and it should happen in writing. So there are lots of details in those agreements that you should absolutely check with the union before you sign it.
Absolutely, and if you remember all of your contracts, all of your agreements, we can have a look at them for you, and we'll tell you whether they're unusual in some way or whether they are what we would expect to see.
Yeah, what we want to avoid is any gratitude being part of the exchange. So we just want to avoid, well, you should be grateful that we're developing your show, or we're helping you, and aren't you lucky? Like, any of that stuff is not a good basis for a legal agreement, which is what you are making.
I mean, to be fair, some of them might say, will you mention us if you take it somewhere else, you know, give us a thanks, because we've really worked with you, but it shouldn't be anything else, as in that you give us all your money forever because, hey, we helped you.
Also, just on that note, where people insist on a credit moving forwards, that means you have to make sure that every agreement you sign with a future producer includes that credit, and future producers might not want that. So you are then burdened with that for the rest of your life if that's what you agree to. So just be aware of what you're agreeing to.
Mindful.
But that's okay, because there's a theatre, there's a producer that wants to commission this show, and they've made us an offer in a contract. So how do I know that the offer they've made is a reasonable, fair exchange?
Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, but that's okay. Because the musical theatre guidelines, the musical theatre kit, needs to be seen alongside our existing theatre agreements. So this you will find under rates and agreements on the website. And some of you, the eagle-eyed amongst you, may have noticed that there is a small picture of an unlocked padlock here. For some of you, when you first go to the website, it will not be unlocked. It will be a picture of a padlock. If you're not a member of the Writers Guild, you can still see this content. All we ask is that you register, so that we can really see how many people are accessing different documents. It's a monitoring mechanism. So you'll just have to create a little account, and then you can see all of these. And what happens is we have got industry agreements with 3 groups. There's the group that we call the national companies. So it's the RSC, the National and the Royal Court. Then we have the UK theatre members, which tend to be the main subsidised theatres, the large companies and so on, who are members of UK theatre. And then there's the Independent Theatre Council agreement. And for the ITC ethical managers, they're bound by this agreement. Others aren't necessarily bound to it in the same way, but they will tend to use the agreement and the rates as the baseline, and certainly we would want to see them being used as the baseline. So these agreements are regularly negotiated, regularly updated, and they cover the terms and conditions that you would expect, and how you would be treated. So you would, if you've been offered this contract, you can have a look at these terms and agreements and see whether there's a marry up there. And then you're going to want to flick back over to the musical theatre guidelines to have a look at the rates, because they're slightly different from the rates that you'll see here.
So just to expand on that a little bit, I've put links in the chat. It's quite difficult to find the list of member organisations of UK Theatre. I've put a direct link to it because they bury it in, would you like to join us? Here are some lists, here are some organisations that are already members. That is a direct link in the chat, and I imagine they keep the list up to date. So if a company makes you an offer, you can check the list and see if they're a UK Theatre member, and if they are, they should be sticking to the terms of our UK Theatre agreement. If a company is an ITC member and then they are an ethical manager, they should be sticking to the terms of our ITC agreement. But the other thing to say about the ITC agreement is it is a really good baseline for anyone. So if a person's like, I don't have a company, I'm just doing this thing with this new musical that I'm inviting, you can say to them, a really good baseline for you to follow is the ITC agreement at the Writers Guild. So I have discovered that my theatre company are a member of UK Theatre, and I'm looking at the musical theatre rates in the musical theatre guidelines, and I'm looking at the UK Theatre rates on the rate card, and they're very different. And the UK Theatre company is pointing at the UK Theatre rates and saying, no, no, these are the rates. And I'm looking at the musical theatre guidelines and saying, there's a lot more money in this thing.
Yeah.
You want to just talk about that?
I can unpack that quick. So it's worth bearing in mind that the UK theatre rates, the overwhelming majority of UK theatre, subsidised theatres, musicals aren't their main work that they commission. And so those rates are based on the non-musical version. So they're based on a play or a show of some kind. And where you have multiple writers, there would normally be a split, because the writers would be doing that. In musical theatre, of course, you're doing something different, because the writer one, who's writing the book, you know, he's going to write the whole book, but there's going to be another person who's going to be writing the whole score, and then possibly even another person who's writing the lyrics. So there's more work being produced. So you would expect to see more money going in, because it's not. Yeah, go on. The whole piece is written 3 times over. Exactly.
As opposed to if there were 3 writers writing a play, you might only be doing a third of the actual writing that you would normally do, because 2 other people are also writing scenes and contributing characters and plot points. But in a musical, the whole thing gets written 3 times, because a whole book is a whole play, and a whole score is a whole play, and a whole set of lyrics is a whole play.
And one of the issues has been is that we haven't yet, and I say the word yet, but we haven't yet got to the point where we've managed to formally agree a second additional rate for a musical. And part of that as well is because, as we mentioned right at the very start, so many different formats, so many different models, it's always got into some very complicated details when we've discussed that, which is why what we do is we say this is the standard rate for your standard kind of play, non-musical play. This is really where we think you should be pitching, you know, if it's a full musical, and depending then on what's happening, it may be more, and it should fall around there. Obviously, it's really difficult at the moment talking about rates because of the pandemic, and we know that lots of theatres and lots of organisations are trying to do more with less, but you really do need to try and stick to your guns on this, especially if you're unrepresented. If you're fortunate enough to have an agent, they should be making those arguments for you. But if you don't have an agent, you know, do push. We know you need the work at the moment. We know that people want to make anything, but don't undercut yourself in that way.
So there's some questions coming in the chat. David's absolutely right. This is why he created these guidelines in the first place, because people were expecting that he would just take a third of a normal fee. This is the wonderful work that David and Bernie did long ago. So the question, if one person is the book writer and one person is the music and lyrics writer, would you recommend splitting right? So the split we recommend is a third, a third, a third. So the book is a third, the music is a third, and the lyrics are a third. So if a person is writing music and lyrics, they're getting 2/3. That's the split we recommend. There are obviously ways to do that. If you're writing, like I do, book and lyrics, and someone else is writing music and lyrics, then you split it 50-50, because that's the work, that is the division of labor. I have collaborative relationships where, even though I write music and lyric, I write book and lyrics, the composer and I talk and make every decision about character and scene journey and plot points so completely together that we have a 50-50 split, because I don't make any decisions without him and he doesn't make any decisions without me, and that's just how we feel it's the fairest representation. So there are collaborative teams that work on a 50-50 basis, even if that is not the split of labor, but we recommend a third, a third, and a third. That's one question. And can we talk about radio musicals at the end? We do have a little thing about that. So I've made a note, but can somebody remind me to talk about radio? Right, guidance around rights, where a musical is developed collaboratively between a writer, a composer, lyricist, and non-professional members of a theatre company through a participatory process. So that is devised work. That falls under devised work, which is slightly different. And if we have time at the end, we can talk about it. But otherwise, if you have a specific question about devised work, please drop an email to editorial@WriterSkills, and I can talk about that, and the officers can talk about that specifically.
Yeah, and there's also that whole split between when you're doing community work as well, where people are being brought in as a professional to work with amateurs, is really tricky and can be subject to different types of contractual arrangements, because there's some big ethical questions around some of that, which may take us beyond the scope of time that we've got, but let's see how we do.
Let's see how we do. So let's talk a little more about that at the end, but it is devising, and that's, yeah, we'd much rather talk about that in more detail because it's really important. So it's all fine really with regard to the rates, because actually what I've done is I've written a 10-minute piece, so I'm just going to prorata the existing rates, and that's easy, right?
Well, it's not quite as simple as that. Is my stock answer to any question that you seem to be asking me at the moment.
It's not as simple as that either.
So the issue with 10-minute musicals is you have to ask what kind of 10-minute musical. And part of what you've got to think about is, are you ever going to be able to use it again? Is it 10 minutes as a sort of sample, a development that you're then going to take on into so it's sort of a development stage, and we're opening it up for you to write 10 minutes, which hopefully you will then be able to expand later. You need to think about rights, who is commissioning it and what for. If this is going to be, for example, a commission to write 10 minutes on why beans are the greatest on toast topping, and this is for the bean canners company have launched their competition, it's highly unlikely there's going to be a wider audience for this outside of that, and it's also really likely that company is going to want to keep using it forever. In which case it might be a buyout situation where they are actually wanting, you're not going to be able to do much with it afterwards, they're going to want to buy it out. Now, the difference between a license where you're effectively letting someone put on a couple of productions, which is what the prorated rate would be based on, And the fact that you are that you are selling a piece of your work forever and you're not going to get any other money from it ever, that's a big gap. It can be between 200 and 800% difference in how much you could expect to make.
We should say as well, because this occurs to me a lot, 10-minute musicals are often like, here's a competition to write a 10-minute musical, and here's the theme spaced out that we want you to. I say that because it was the theme of the thing I wrote, a really good musical, and I now have nothing to do. I can't do anything with it because no one else has ever given that theme. So it's very difficult to take.
However, someone might, so you've got to dig in. You've got to do your due diligence. And I mean, that's a point that we haven't talked about before, and perhaps we should have, when we were talking about working with production companies and producers and competitions. There's no, sadly, there's no theatre police that go around and shut down people who have unlawfully said that they're producers. Anyone can say, I am a producer, and anyone can say this is a competition. And their ability to actually do what they offer ranges quite significantly. And unfortunately, it's on you, and we as unions will always try to help. But you've really got to dig in. So who is it that's commissioning this 10-minute musical? What do they want, and what will I get from it?
Fair exchange is the thing, isn't it? Always, if it's a fair exchange. And that's not to say that they might say you'll get exposure for your work, because the last time I checked, Sainsbury's will not give me ice cream in exchange for exposure. But it's fine, because I've got this friend, and my friend I've got lots of friends apparently who produce work, and my friend produces work in a festival form, which is terribly exciting. It's like a local thing. I've been asked to write a musical for this festival, and it's a bunch of community, for example, community people who are going to be in it, and it's super exciting. Everyone in the local area is going to see my work. There's no actual payment, of course, because it's a festival and it's kind of for charity, so there's no payment, but that's okay, right?
Well, is it okay? And it's a question that you have to ask yourself. And once again, we have produced a handy guide which you can find on the website, and I'll just do a little share so that you can all see it. And it is the key question, should I work for free? And then we've got a little flow chart for you, and this is where you'll find the theatre version. And I happen to know that the MU also do a fantastic one for musicians, that you can have a look. You follow the flow chart through. The key question is, first of all, are these people who are doing this organisation, who are doing this festival, do they fall under one of the agreements? Now, it's just your friends in this instance, so we think that it might not be, but they might. So let's check, first of all, are they operating under an agreement? If they are, then you should be getting paid. Then what you have to look at again is rights. Are they looking to take any sort of rights? It isn't necessarily. There's a lot of talk, and there's a school of thought that says it's always brilliant. It's always brilliant to see your work put on. That's the best thing. It's the joy of getting it on. That's what we're all doing it for. But actually, it's not always that helpful to see your own work being done really badly in a context, and in fact it can be detrimental to your career as a writer, because sometimes people will think about the production rather than the script or the score. So you've got to bear that in mind. You also want to ask, is anyone else getting paid? Because what we see a lot of in the Guild is a fantastic opportunity, in inverted commas, for writers, which is this great opportunity for a writer to see what it's like for everyone else to be paid for doing a production of your work except you. So the director will be getting paid, the technicians will be getting paid, the actors will be getting paid, but you won't be as a writer, because you're going to get to see the show. And we don't think that's fair. So if the other people are getting paid, the writer should be getting paid too. Now, the charity issue. Many people want to do things for charity, and I would never ever say that you shouldn't do it for charity. However, what I've done, what lots of people do for charity, is that you charge them your fee and you donate the fee back, and that makes it really transparent just how much you're giving by doing a piece of work for free. You don't just rattle out a musical, you know, idly, oh well, yeah, of course I'll just write you a musical for your charity. It's like, this is a significant donation that you're asking for, and if you're happy to give that, then let it be seen what that is, and it helps you then to value your own work and
it's
yourself.
shocking. It's astonishing when you go and look up what that rate should be, and you think, am I making a, you know, several £1,000 donation to this charity by doing this? And the answer is, yeah, you are. Yeah.
You are, and you should see it as such.
There's a really interesting thing that David said in the chat. 10-minute musicals are a great calling card, and things can develop from an initial 10-minute piece, like Next to Normal began as a 10-minute assignment. And that's absolutely right, but it was written as part of an education process. The point of it was not to develop something that happens as an incidental, and it's wonderful. And if you specifically decide to write a 10-minute musical as a calling card, amazing. Like that is then your choice, and the fair exchange that you're putting in the work in the hope that you get work out of it. If you think that's the best form of calling card for you, amazing. There's no guarantee of those things, and as a union we are concerned with a guaranteed fair exchange for your work, so it's a slightly different thing. So okay, great. So I'm not doing it for the exposure, mainly because I want to buy the ice cream. Is it the same for, talk to me about competitions, because competitions are a different thing, aren't they? You never get paid. In fact, sometimes you pay to enter your work in a competition, but you get prestige out of it.
Again, I recommend that you take your prestige to the supermarket and see how much you can buy for it. Competitions is really difficult. In fact, it's so difficult that we have just produced, as you may know, Jen, as you are the major contributor, we've just produced a new guide. It's not been published yet. It should be coming out in the next couple of weeks, which is called Competition or Cut Price Commission, because there are some brilliant competitions. There are some brilliant competitions which, by entering and certainly by winning, you would get an opportunity or an amount of money or other benefits that you would not normally be able to access for the stage of career that you are currently. And they, we say, are good competitions. You know, if you enter a competition that gives you the right to have a full professional production for which you are paid, working with really experienced actors and directors, and some development work and support and mentoring, fantastic. Godspeed, we say to those competitions. However, if you are winning the opportunity to do a piece of work for less than you would have been paid to do it normally, that's just a cut price commission. And if you are entering a competition for the opportunity to sign the rights of your own work away for next to no payment, the only person winning in that context is the organizer. It is not the writer.
And the difference is best viewed, I think, from the point of view of the organizer. I really want to put on a new musical. I can't afford to pay the commission fee that is the union minimum. You know, I just can't meet those terms. So I'm going to call it a competition, and that makes it okay. It's not acceptable.
And to be fair to some of our competition organisers, sometimes it is good intentions and a lack of awareness of what those rates should be, and we're always happy to talk to people who want to do something, because sometimes it isn't about the cold hard cash, sometimes it is about other benefits, and it's about other things that writers get, and it can be a package that when you put all of that together, it's worth the equivalent of a commission fee. Again, it's something that we can advise our members on if they're not sure, but always read the small print. And if there isn't any small print, ask about the terms and conditions. And if they won't release them, then you don't want to be entering that competition.
It's also worth thinking about what that guarantee is. So if they say we're going to show your work to an industry audience, have they guaranteed that those people are going to be in the room, or have they just invited them and they're hoping that those people are going to show up? Who are those people? Could those people genuinely help you with your work? You know, if those people are Cameron McIntosh, is he really going to come in looking for a show he can produce? And if, you know, or is it 100 producers from an organization who are going to show up because they're there anyway, and your work is going to be showcased in front of all of them at a festival, and therefore you're more likely to hook up with somebody who can actually help you develop your work. So it's about where the guarantee is. You know, if they're offering dramaturgy, is this an experienced dramaturg who's worked with writers in this field in this way? How much contact time do you get with them? You know, all of those things are, you have the right to ask those questions. And
can I come in on that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Because we sort of get quite a lot of competitions brought to us by members across the industry, but with what we started doing with anyone who brings a competition to us that's around sort of composition and songwriting, we take it to our music writers committee and discuss it, and they give us their steer on it, on whether it looks like a legitimate opportunity. We look at the prize on offer, we look at how many people are entering and what your chances are, and if it's a real prize, if there's any exploitation, you know, lots of financial entry fees where, you know, that aren't proportionate to the prize. And what we do as well is we approach people. If we don't think that it's a fair offering, then we go to them and we explain why. And sometimes it's too late for them to change. Sometimes they're not interested in engaging with us. But I think it's, you know, we don't call people out publicly immediately, but we do like to take things to them, and so we do rely on our members actually before they enter these things to come to us. And I think just to go back to the previous point as well about working for free, you might have seen there was a case a few weeks ago of a venue looking for performers to work for free, and it went viral, and we got in touch with the venue, we sent them an email, and within minutes they got on the phone to us, and we had a really reasonable exchange with them. And they were very happy to put their hands up and say, we got this wrong. We didn't intend to exploit anyone, but we can totally see how we didn't do this in the way we should have done. And they said, look, can you help us put this right? And they worked with us. And we said, well, you need to still engage performers for this event, but you need to do it using MU rates or higher. And they agreed to do so. And they worked with us, and most people backed down online, but still some people had a go at them saying, no, I'm not having it. But ultimately, you know, they were actually grateful of the fact that we'd gone to them and we said, we'll work with you to try and turn it around. So I think it's always worth going to people privately before you call them out and just try and help them turn it around.
Well, also, it's always worth people contacting the union to say, I've got no resources and I want to do this thing. Can you help me make that work in a fair and reasonable way? And unions will always have a chat. Someone will always have a chat about how to be fair, because that's what a union is, because we're just a bunch of writers. We want to be treated nicely.
and loads of
we need opportunities.
Loads of companies do it, and we spend a lot of time talking to them, and we can work something out, and we can have a look and give them some advice. Very occasionally the advice is, you just can't do that, it's just not fair on the writers, but helping them to understand that is part of the process.
I've just looked at the time and I'm going to slightly push us on because it's very exciting. The director that we're working with, who's got lots of experience in the business, is just going to rewrite a couple of the scenes for us because they're not working. So the director's going to make those work, and they don't need us in rehearsals because they're good. They're fine to go and make their own changes. So that's...
I'm afraid that they can't do that.
What?
And yet again, we have another exciting publication, and this one is a really important one, and it's called the Rights Card, and you'll find it in that resources section, the Rights Card for Playwrights it's called, and this sets out what all playwrights are entitled to. So this is under all of the agreements. There are certain rights that people are entitled to, that we will always defend and support you on, and they're part of all of this. So writers are entitled to attend workshops. There comes some responsibility with that, obviously. You can't start throwing the scenery around and shouting at people and behaving inappropriately, but you have the right to attend rehearsals. And in all of our agreements, there is the right to be paid for a certain number of those. It's not for everyone. If you want to go to every single rehearsal, then you won't be paid for all of them, but you are entitled to attend all of those rehearsals. And a director or a producer cannot rewrite your work. There are textual integrity clauses in all of our agreements that say that any changes must be made by the writer and agreed to by the writer. So you have to give your permission. Ideally, any writer or anyone who wants to change should request the change of you. For you to make it. If that's not possible for whatever reason, you know, you're in LA and they're in Bridlington, and the time difference and everything makes it impossible, then there should at least be an email permission sought, because otherwise, if they go ahead with doctored and changed versions, you know, they're getting into the areas of copyright infringement, and it's really serious. So don't give people permission just to change your work. And if people are changing your work without your consent, that is absolutely something that the Guild can help you with. And that is what we do a lot of the time.
It's also against the law.
Yeah. I mean, copyright says they can't do it.
Okay, so I'm not producing my work in any theatres right now because there aren't any open, obviously. But I am making a lot of work online. So are the guidelines the same for me doing that?
We have, again, produced some guidelines for this, and we were really pleased that we were able, at the very start of the pandemic, we worked with UK Theatre and ITC, and we produced some special guidelines called Playwrights and Theatres During the Closure, Guidelines for Best Practice, and they include guidelines around digital content. You'll also find on our website another document which is about online content, which is aimed more around film and TV, but actually the principles are the same. The principles are that writing a piece of work is the same task irrespective of its later use. So if you're writing a piece of work, if you're writing a musical to be performed online, it is the same amount of work as it is if you're writing it to go on stage. So there is no reason why the basic arrangements that are in the existing theatre agreements shouldn't be in place. And UK Theatre agreed with that. Now the difference, and where it did get tricky, is of course, you know, you might be commissioning a show 2 hours. People weren't, certainly in the first parts of the pandemic, commissioning big pieces online. They were trying to get smaller amounts of money to a wider group of people because of some of the difficulties that were being faced. So what we've got in that document are, for much smaller pieces or for unique pieces or various different things, what are some ballpark figures that we all agreed seemed fair, some benchmarks we've put in there for different lengths of work, and it includes the rights as well. So it's still a license, and we're now taking part in quite detailed conversations and discussions, and there'll be some news on this very soon, around further guidelines around the development of that sort of work, because what we've seen now as a result of the pandemic is that there are different models of streamed work. So you've got the sort of event model where you're looking at the total number of tickets sold will only ever be the equivalent of the total of tickets that would have been sold if it had been put on in the theatre. So it's very, very similar agreements, versus we're going to put it on our website and potentially, like, you know, 1 billion people could watch it if they want to, and you've just had your standard fee and you've got no royalties, and that's no good. So they're different models. Again, it's something that we will always advise, and we've been advising lots of theatres and companies through the course of the pandemic about how to go about that. So you can come to us with those.
And that work happened immediately. It was astonishing how quickly you guys just moved on that and did the work. So I am super grateful for that. So we've been talking about theatre. Let's just have a quick moment, if we can, talking about, we talked about online stuff. What about radio, musicals? What about, you know, other media options for musical theatre?
So we'll talk about, let's talk about radio first, or as we like to say now, audio, because really radio, for me, I still call it the wireless. You know, you associate with the thing, whereas now with the world of podcasts and stuff like that, it's a bit different. So with the BBC, who is still the main one of the main broadcasters, we have a radio drama agreement, which I think it is fair to say isn't really designed for musicals. It is much more designed for your traditional radio play. But radio and audio are in a really difficult position at the moment. They're definitely in transition. The kinds of rewards that you will get in radio versus the kind of audio versus the kinds of contracts that you will get is, you know, it's not great. The money isn't good in radio, in audio. Even with the BBC, it's much lower than you would get. In radio, some of the agreements, they compensate for this by only taking very limited rights. So they will only take the radio or the audio rights, and you are completely free to exploit anywhere else the drama in that way. But the relationship with music and drama isn't something that they're very strong on, really, and it is something that we're talking about.
Just to make,
especially podcasts, and you'll get a different deal with a podcast if you approach it, if you're commissioned, than if you do it as a sale. And it's the sales that will sometimes deliver a slightly better deal for a writer, because if it's made by an independent producer, or it's a recording of something that's happened elsewhere that they're then using an audio broadcast of, or if you've just made it with an independent producer and then sold the recording, the product in, you'll have a different contractual arrangement than if you have been commissioned by a broadcaster.
Just to be clear about that, film tends to take rights across the board. So if you sell a story for a film, you can't make it on telly, you can't make it in theatre, you can't make it on radio. They own all of those rights. That's just what that means. If you sell a story on radio, then you still have the right to make it into a theatre piece or a film or whatever. I'm going to push us along because there's other questions coming in that are really useful. Somebody asked, what about workshops of musicals? Teresa, it would help to include something about workshops of musicals. There are no actual guidelines that I know of for how much to pay writers and composers for this. Nothing on the MU as far as I know. I had to do a lot of searching when applying for Arts Council grants. So the guidelines, the agreements for UK theatre, Leslie's going to correct me if I'm wrong, have a daily rate for a writer to be in a rehearsal room. Lesley, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. It really depends what you're doing. We've got workshop rates. There is an issue. There is a real issue with the Arts Council, and it is an issue that we have raised repeatedly, that lots of their applications ask for day rates for writers, for writing, actually, is what they mean, and that's not how writers really work. There are workshop payments, and we have fees, workshop attendance fees, in all of the different agreements to do that. But the day rate, and we can advise on day rates for different activities. But I don't know about the music side, I'm afraid.
Can I just come in there?
Yeah, please do.
The MU does have some workshop rates, but they're more for our teaching members, really. So they're, I think they're £202 a day, something like that, and they're used very much more in the educational kind of environment. But it is the kind of thing where if people come to us saying, this is what I'm trying to do, we will try and find something that's either based on our existent rates, or we'll do a bit more digging around and see if we can find something that's suitable. Because I appreciate, you know, Arts Council do very much try and use union rates, don't they? So we get a lot of people coming to us saying, I'm putting together a funding application and I really need to use something that I can say is the union rate. So we do what we can to kind of provide bespoke stuff where needed.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. And again, with the workshop, it is that it's always worth, and I think there is a real grey area, that teaching practitioner line of what you're being asked to do, or what you're asking someone to do, is really worth drilling into when you're setting or indeed accepting any of those rates.
We've had a question via email about jukebox musicals, and also in the chat about jukebox musicals. So in the chat, could I ask please, what advice and tips do you have for those of us who are interested in writing the book for a jukebox or a catalogue musical, i.e. the music is all pre-existing? And on email, what permissions are needed to write a musical biography using standards and originals? Do publishers need to know if we feature their songs on stage, even though we're paying PRS? Kelly, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So you would need to get clearance for this. You'd need to license them. Whereas existent songs can be performed in a live context under the PRS LP tariff, saying, you know, in sort of gig venues, without getting prior permission. It's different in a theatrical context. So you would actually have to get permission to use these. You need to go to PRS and explain what it is that you're doing, and the songs that you want to use, assuming, you know, they're in copyright, and because they're not covered, even if the venue has its own music license, it wouldn't be, if the songs form part of the action, you know, if they're even being delivered by the performers or they're audible to the performers, then they would need to be licensed separately.
There was one very famous case where a West End show wanted to use the Beatles catalogue, and for a long time the people who owned the rights to the Beatles catalogue would not allow them to be used if there was a narrative involved. So there was a musical, which was basically a concert of Beatles songs with some narrative that didn't have any dialogue with it, and was just kind of done with staging. It was kind of interesting. So yeah, it's always best to check directly. Moving quickly on, and I know we're covering a lot of stuff very quickly, and obviously you're going to join the union if you're not already a member, and then you can ask us much more detail, because that's what the union is for. So rights, acquiring rights, I thought it'd be really useful to just really quickly talk about, if you want to adapt a book or a film, how does that work? Lesley, do you want to just speak to that quickly?
Yeah, so the first thing you've got to make sure is you know, as Kelly just said, is it in copyright? You know, copyright isn't, and I'm going to wheel it out to do it every time. I can't resist. You know, it's David Edgar's great joke, is that you know, writers are one of the few professionals that compete with the dead for their work. So because there's so many works that are out of copyright. So you need to find out if it's in copyright or not. If it is, you will need to clear those rights. Now that may mean that you need to get in touch with the publisher to deal with those rights. It may be that you need to get in touch with someone's agent to get agreement, but basically you have to get the underlying rights cleared. You can't just incorporate someone else's work or their characters into that. So it would very much depend what the format was that you were using. Many publishers also have got databases and so on that you can find out. There's a whole load of them out there that you can find out who you need to contact or what rates it is. It will make a difference whether you're doing it professionally or as an amateur sort of production as well, because you might be charged different rates. In some instances, you know, someone might be very generous if it's a particularly imaginative or brilliant use of their work, and they might say, do you know what, you know, I'm prepared to give you clearance for that. But it will differ. But you absolutely, if you're going to use someone else's work, you absolutely have to clear the rights to do so.
Yes.
And we can advise you on how to do that if you're a member.
Absolutely. There's a couple of questions I've seen coming in that are more specific MU ones, and I would recommend that you contact the MU and speak to them. Yasmin, I think you asked about arrangements, and that is a very specifically MU thing. Somebody's asked, I'm recording an album of the songs in my musical. Do you have advice? I mean, good luck and don't spend too much money, but speak to the MU about recording albums, because that's a very specifically MUE thing that they can advise you on. I've had a question just come in from the chat. Assuming I have to be a guild member to ask for help on a commissioning contract, how long would it take for the contract to be read? So, Lesley, do you want to just talk a little bit about our contract vetting?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, you do have to be a member for us to contract, to give you contract advice.
Do I have to be a full member, or can I be
No, you don't have to be a full member. You can be a candidate member. So, and what happens is you can send us your script and we will read it. And how long? I mean, the maximum is 2 weeks usually. Often much swifter. It simply depends. We tend to find these things can go in peaks and troughs. So if half of England has sent us their scripts to read in the space of 10 days, it's going to take us a little bit longer than if it's a quieter week. So you will need to be a member, and if you want immediate advice, I'm afraid you do need to have paid a full year subs. So if you're not seeking immediate advice, then you can join and spread your membership out in instalments. But if you want immediate advice, then you do have to have joined for the full year, and then we will get that to you. And you can get a range of advice. So we can give you sort of very standard advice, you know, yes, this looks fine, or I would go back on these particular clauses, and this is what we'd recommend you ask for, right down to very high level kind of legal advice from our team of solicitors that we work with, who will go through and advise on them.
Just to say that the officers, all of the officers at the Guild are hugely knowledgeable, and even sometimes just a quick 5-minute chat with someone in the office, it will give you the answer that you're looking for. So it doesn't have to be that you have to wait for a lawyer to come back to you, but that is also available in circumstances that you might need that. So opera, Sky, thank you for waiting with your question. We are and have been in the process of trying to develop opera guidelines. It's difficult. Not many people write opera librettos in this country who are willing to come forward and share their details with us, and we need that in order to see what's going on in the industry, to know. So the short answer is no, the musical theatre guidelines don't specifically regard opera. It works slightly differently. But yes, you can get support from your union about specific deals if you're being invited to write opera, or you're interested in writing opera and you want to know how those agreements might work. The MU can certainly speak to you about composition for opera, which is a lot more along the lines of their composition guidelines, and you know, the Guild can talk to you about being a libretto writer, but no, the musical theatre guidelines do not necessarily apply to opera. Thank you for waiting with your question. Does anybody have other questions that they want to pop into the chat? We've also got a couple from email for a concert of songs from a musical with a narration which is adapted from a novel. So if you've got songs from a novel that you've adapted and you want to do a concert of them, and you think, well, the songs don't include any actual text from the novel, and the music isn't from the novel, so I don't need to involve the underlying rights author, that's not true. If you've adapted their work, you have to involve them in everything that you do with any of that material, even if you're just doing a concert of songs, unless the author has specifically allowed you to have freedom to use the song. So I adapted a novel in which the author chose to say at the beginning, you are writing songs, I do not have any interest in those, you may do with them as you please, even when you don't have the rights to put the show on. But unless they've said that, you have to check with them. More questions. Commissioning rates and guidelines. So all of the rates for our umbrella agreements are on the rates and agreements page, which is on our website. It's a very clear tab at the top. You'll see it, but Lesley might be able to share the slide.
Yep, so I will just show you again
where that is.
Here we go. Hold on, and share this one. Share. there we go. So that's the home page here. And then you've got the resources. Everything is there except for the rates and agreements that you will find there.
So rates and agreements is the actual negotiated agreements that we have with umbrella organisations, the ITC, UK Theatre and the TNC. But anything that is a guideline and not specifically negotiated is under resources, and that includes the musical theatre kit and the musical theatre guidelines, as well as things like should I work for free and other such stuff that is got good advice, but we didn't negotiate it with anybody. It's just our advice.
Oh, there's a really good question that has just pinged in, which is, I am a Brit living overseas. Do the same rates apply?
It's a great question.
So there, no, it's the long and short of it. It will depend. What we would suggest is that it depends where you're producing your work, and we advise and we negotiate under UK law, which is all we can really do. So in the absence, and I'm not sure if there is a Writers Guild that covers Mauritius or a Dramatist Guild that covers Mauritius, but there's like international federations of Writers Guilds. We're all across the world, and we're really clear about our own jurisdictions, and we all talk to each other. We get together really regularly and talk about these things. So find out which unions or organisations are governing the work in your territory. If you can't find any, you know, of course you could take our rates and agreements into your negotiations and say, this is what I'm used to, this is how it works in the UK, and negotiate it. But obviously, not only is there issues of exchange rates, there's also, you know, standards of living and the relative prices and values of things across different continents and so on are very different. So they don't necessarily translate, but you can always start there for a conversation, and it might help you if there are gaps, because not everywhere in the world allows collective bargaining. So there are countries around the world where it's prohibited. You're not allowed to do agreements of the kind that we're very fortunate that we can do in the UK, and that can be a hindrance. So
there are international affiliated unions, of which we are a member of several of those groups. So you'll be able to find those using Google. But the other thing is to say, finding a local solicitor is always a good idea if you're signing any kind of agreement, just because there are legal terms that they can help you understand, and you can have a conversation with them about what the other writers' guilds do recommend, and you can say, you know, the Writers Guild of Great Britain recommends these terms. How can we negotiate for that kind of fair exchange?
But what I will say is it's to do with where the commissioner is based. So if you as a Brit living in Mauritius are being commissioned by the Royal Court, the fact that you live in Mauritius is irrelevant. If you're being commissioned for work that's being produced in the UK, then it does fall under UK terms. If it's work that's being commissioned in the place that you're living, then it will come under the place that you're living. So
it's also always worth thinking about how copyright works in the country where you live, because those regulations vary widely around the globe as well. So it's really worth looking into that if you're not based in this country. A more general question has come in to me. After a pandemic, I don't know if anybody knows the answer to a question that starts after a pandemic. How can we change tact in approaching people to commission new musical theatre from scratch rather than licensing an existing product? I mean, the guild, part of the guild's conversations with people during negotiating these, you know, new rates and terms for the pandemic times are to say, we're still here, we're still making work, we still want to work with you, we still want to encourage producers to get in touch with us to find out how best to make work and to continue to produce new writing. Lesley, do you want to just say?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing a big piece of work working with, and we've got the support of most theatre organisations in the UK, we're hoping to get funding to actually have a scheme to commission new work, and that will include musical theatre. You know, so there's that. I think the thing to say about theatre and pandemics, because the point at which it's always mentioned, it all gets a bit flat, and it has been awful, and it's had a really difficult impact on the industry. But it's worth saying that theatre survived the fall of the Roman Empire and several global plagues over time. I think it's going to get back from this one. It might come back differently, but I think it will. It will survive and it will evolve, and will be part of those ongoing discussions. And we're already seeing this incredible, the way people have started to think about getting their work online or doing it outdoors, or looking at different ways in which venues can be used. Inevitably and unavoidably, I think, sadly, there is going to be a period where commissions are hard to come by, simply because of the backlog of unproduced work that the pandemic has created. But then I think, there's lots of talk about us going into the roaring 20s. I think people have been in their house for nearly 2 years. They're going to want to get out. They're going to want to hear musicals. Musicals are just so vibrant, and it's such an incredible experience that I think that there's going to be a huge appetite, particularly for very life-affirming kinds of work, and that joy that you can get from a musical that you don't always get from other forms of entertainment. And I think there will be an appetite, and I think we've all got to just keep reminding people that work is there, and there are people who are ready to produce it.
Just to respond to a question that's come into the chat, as a producer and venue owner, if I was in a position to start looking to commission new writers, is there a place where that information can be shared? Lesley, do you want to answer that?
Sorry,
commissioning opportunities, do we have a place that can be shared?
Oh yes, we have our newsletter. So if you would like to advertise an opportunity, then you can send it through to bulletin at WGGB. I'm sure, Kate, if you can drop the link in for that email address, we can put stuff in our e-bulletin. We just check that any opportunities are legit, so that we would expect them to be at least at our minimums or a reasonable package, if it's outside of one of our agreements. But yeah, we can promote that.
With regard to Jukebox, the questions come in. You say it's PRS that licenses music and not individual music publishers. These questions are MU questions, and I don't want to rush Kelly in the answers because I think they're all important. So I would advise you strongly to just speak to the MU at length about that stuff, because
it could be, you can directly license with publishers, but it really depends on the material that you're looking to use and the exact way that you're looking to use it. But I'll put my email address in the chat again, but do feel free to come to us if anything's really specific.
And I think parodies fall under that umbrella as well. Just go to the MU and ask those questions specifically. So just another couple of quick things that we haven't mentioned. If you're making immersive, devised, unusual, involved musical theatre like I do, then come to us and we can answer those questions as well. Anything that you think, well, this doesn't fit that model, like, come and ask us, because someone, and it's probably me, makes that work. I also make theatre gaming, musical theatre gaming crossover stuff. So if you want to know anything else, ask. For people who just want to get their work out there and are applying to Arts Council for funding, I want everyone to be aware that they have access support workers. So you can ask the Arts Council if you have a disability of any kind that prevents you from having access to the application process in the same way that other people do. You can ask the Arts Council to pay for an access support worker for you, who you choose. It's someone you know and love, and they will pay a daily rate for that person to support you in putting an application forward. So don't think that you are prevented. I have very high anxiety. I could not do applications. I wrote to them and said, I need an access support worker, and now someone else does my applications for me. I am very open about all of that and so happy to have conversations about it. So if there's something preventing you from making work that isn't about the work, it's about that kind of support that you can't access, ask the question.
Can I just add to that as well? During the pandemic, we actually started sort of offering further advice around funding for our members, because most of our members are freelance. They've never applied for funding before, and they were really trying to at the most competitive time. So we now have an advisor who reads our members' applications before they're submitted to Arts Council, and it's been really effective. It's really helped people out. And so we've seen a lot of people actually collaborating as well. So we're seeing applications for theatre projects, working with writers and other creatives, and they all get a really good round of feedback before they're submitted. Similarly, if an application hasn't been successful, our members bring it to us and we help them to resubmit it when it's a bit stronger. So, you know, if you are working with any composers, it's worth making sure that they know that through the MU they could get some feedback on the funding.
Which is more than you can actually get officially from the Writers Guild, because we don't officially support funding. Although I will talk to you about access if you need that support. And the other thing,
I also, you know, because we are aware that this is it, and we're currently looking at our training opportunities for the coming year, and certainly writing applications and how to go about that is something that we get a lot of inquiries about. So it's very much on our agenda, but you know, we would trust the advice that you would get from the MU.
I just wanted to say a quick thing that I think is often goes unsaid, which is people who are lucky enough to have friends they can ask advice from, that's great, or a lawyer they can ask advice from, also great. Agents also give great advice, but the only place you can go to get advice that only considers the best interests of the writer and how they can have the fairest living wage from, you know, and make work and have a career is the union. Because agents also have to have relationships with producers. In order to be able to get people work, they need the producers to come to them so that they can give their clients to those producers. So the only people who are just thinking about what's best for the writer is the union, and composer is the union. So if you have people in your life who already support and mentor and advise and represent you, that's brilliant, and they all have their wonderful uses. But please also, if you're not a member of your union, join your union. Lesley, do you want to say some closing things?
Here is what I would like to say. I really hope everyone that you have found that useful. We've tried our best. Do email us afterwards if there's particular questions, or if you've got a very personal sort of situation, and we'll do what we can to help you. Really want to say thank you enormously to Jen, always very generous with her time, and of course Kelly, fantastic. Thank you for coming and joining and giving that extra thing. We've got a YouTube channel where you can watch this again if you like, and lots of other talks as well, and we will be advertising some more sessions for the coming months on our website, and I will hand over for the final farewell to the marvellous Kate Glasspool, but lovely to see you all. Oh, and Jen wants to get in first.
Just wanted to say thank you to all of you for writing musicals, because that's the most important.
Indeed it is. And thank you for being with us today. Kate, over to you.
Oh, thanks everybody. That was a wonderful session, very stimulating.